Well, we're going to switch locations now. We're going to go from the Bahamas to Cayman. And the Cayman Registry is hosting our ship owner panel. And our chief correspondent is Peter Southgate, who is teaming up once again with Sherice Arman of Maples Group to run our ship owners panel. And we're delighted to be also welcoming Jan-Willem Dijssel of Cargill. We have Angela Chao of Foremost Group. And we have Jones Alexandre Barros Soares of Petrobras, as well as Angus Campbell of Schulte Group. So Peter and Sherice, take it on.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. As Colleen mentioned, my name is Peter Southgate. I'm Regional Director for the Americas for the Cayman Registry, which is a division of the Maritime Authority of the Cayman Islands. And I am responsible for technical operations in the Americas region. For those that might not know, the audience, that the Cayman Registry is part of the Red Ensign Group and is highly ranked on all of the major port state MOUs, which is something obviously that we're very proud of. Well, first and foremost, I'd like to thank Colleen and the Shipping Insight team for giving us the opportunity to host, or giving the registry an opportunity to host this panel of distinguished ship owners and representatives. Not something that I thought we would be doing this year. So I'm very pleased that we do have this opportunity. Obviously, in a year where most events have been cancelled, it is rather encouraging to see what I guess some inspiration, innovation, and I'm pretty sure some perspiration, and of course a heavy dose of technology can actually do. So I'm quite impressed with what Colleen and the Shipping Insight team have actually put on here. So congratulations for that. I mean, I think we can all say that all of our businesses have been impacted by this situation, and we're all trying to adapt to the new normal. What the new normal is at this stage, I don't know, but we're obviously trying to do our best. Flag states and ship registries are obviously no exception to this. But fortunately in our case, due to significant investment in technology and resources, we have been able to maintain operations probably about at 80–90% of our normal operation without any major interruption. I mean, apart from a brief spell in March when we really didn't know where things were going, we've been able to maintain our service to our clients in full. So I'm very pleased that we've been in that fortunate position. Having said that, we have had to adjust, and I'm sure all other ship registries have had to adjust their procedures to accommodate that. And following the IMO guidance, we've had to develop processes and procedures to keep the crew, ships safe, crews safe, and ships moving. We've looked at all kinds of alternative ways to ensure compliance, and that hasn't been easy as you can imagine, with a total lockdown. That's not something that we would anticipate, and it's certainly unprecedented. We've looked at remote audits and remote surveys, but from our experience, we definitely don't consider these to be a panacea moving forward. Maybe a short-term fix to get over a certain hurdle, but certainly not as a long-term replacement for the regular attendance and conducting surveys. We've had to extend ship and crew certifications where necessary. But I think one of the big advantages that we have, and one of the big successes that we can put it down, our success to is the ahead of the pandemic, long before any of this, is that we determined that it was appropriate to put resources in key locations worldwide. So having surveyors and technical representation and crew documentation agents and so on and so forth in key areas around the world has allowed us to continue our operations, even though, when travel was impossible. So that has been key to us. Now, I understand this has been mentioned in other panels, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the plight of the seafarer in this current situation. I think it's fair to say that we all agree that seafarers have suffered quite considerably as a result of the pandemic. Displaced crew, furloughed crew working longer than their contractual periods allow, and not to mention, crew suffering directly from the effects of the virus. And you imagine being away from your family, away from your home, and having to deal with the virus and have no prospect of getting home for 14, sometimes even 16 months. It's a pretty horrific thought for most people. Crew have certainly been at the forefront of our measures that we've implemented, and we've worked long and hard to try and assist crews, to assist ship owners, to liaise with port authorities to try and encourage crew changes, and really taking a responsible attitude, because crew are the lifeblood of this industry. So if we can't keep them going, then we're in trouble, I think. So I'm sure the panel, as Sherice will direct, I'm sure the panel would like to share their experiences on that as well. But certainly that's been it's been a large part of my function for the last nine or so months. So I think that's about all I want to say as an introduction. I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to host. What I'd like to do now is perhaps introduce your moderator, Sherice, and give her an opportunity to lead the panel. So I'm sure many of you know Sherice, but just to let you know that Sherice is a partner of Maples and Calder, based in the Cayman Islands, and she is also chairman of the board of the Maritime Authority of the Cayman Islands. So and is a very staunch advocate of the registry, I must say. We certainly appreciate Sherice's support over the years. Sherice is an industry leader in asset finance, particularly in the area of ship and aircraft. She is ranked as a leading lawyer and renowned for excellent client service and in-depth knowledge, particularly in the field of asset finance. Sherice, the Zoom floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and for that kind introduction. Good morning and welcome to the Ship Owners panel. This is the third time that I'm actually participating in this panel. As many of you know, I like to walk around, and so it's gonna be a real challenge for me to just stay still in front of the camera, actually. But I'm really excited about this panel, and I really must commend SHIPPINGinsite for putting this on. I really feel if anybody could have done it, it was SHIPPINGinsite, and I congratulate you 100% on your efforts. We do have an exciting panel for you today. Some familiar faces from some of the prior panels and some new ones participating for their first time on the Ship Owner panel. The Ship Owner panel has tended to be a real focus for us at the SHIPPINGinsite conference. And we welcome today the Chairman and CEO of Foremost Group, Chao, America's lead ocean transportation for Cargill, Jan-Willem van den Dijssel, Executive Manager for Petrobras Transportes, Transpetro, Captain Jones Alexandre Barros Soares, Director of Energy Projects at Schulte Group, Angus Campbell, Regional Director for Americas and Yacht Code Specialist, Peter Southgate, as you would have heard from him earlier. The focus of this panel is ship owners and the issues affecting them. The group we have assembled here is a very, very exciting group, and it would be very difficult to gather a more authoritative group to address these issues. It's funny, I have in the past, when we started this discussion, said to ship owners, I'd really like to ask you about the top issues that keep you up at night. What keeps you awake? But at this point in time, there are so many issues. I don't know how many of you manage to sleep at all at night. But anyway, I'd like to give each of you just a minute, just 1 minute, just to tell us a few things about yourselves. And I'll start with you, Jan-Willem.
Well, thank you, Sherice, and thank you, SHIPPINGinsite. We're encouraged to start our conversations internally with either a moment on safety or diversity and inclusion. And I must thank the organization for once again making sure that on our panels yesterday and today, we have female representation on every panel that we go to publicly. So thanks for the organization on that one. I've been in this business for 25 years, part as a grain trader, but mostly in the maritime sector, transporting grains, fertilizers, phosphorus rock, you name it. What keeps me up at night? Well, we have a strategy to become more modern, green, and customer focused. That is quite something. We run 700 ships, 698 to be precise, as of yesterday. And that is about 200 million tons across the seas. We aim to do that in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. And that sounds easy, and those are not words. If you have followed the press a little bit, I think you'll see we've taken quite an active role in promoting partnerships, because we truly feel that the challenges ahead of us, especially with the IMO's targets towards decarbonizations, are so massive that it will take an industry effort which no single party can solve on its own. So let me stop with that.
Thank you very much. Angela?
Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Peter and Sherice, for having us on this panel today, and for Shipping Insight. As Peter said in his remarks, it is remarkable and very inspiring to be able to put this together virtually so that we can still all be together in these very unprecedented times. So thank you again for inviting me to speak and also to participate on this very esteemed panel. It's my pleasure to be with my fellow panelists. So thank you again. So I'm Angela Chao, Chair and CEO of Foremost Group. We're an American shipping company founded 56 years ago in 1964 by my father, Dr. James S.C. Chao. Foremost owns and manages a modern, eco-friendly fleet of dry bulk carriers. The average age of our fleet is less than 5 years old and has been so for the last 30 years. This is one of the ways that we maintain an eco-friendly fleet that remains on the forefront of environmental technologies, innovations, and compliance, continuously upgrading our tonnage and incorporating the latest technologies and efficiencies in ship hull design into our ships. The fleet is over 5 million dead weight, and we can carry almost 20 million tons of the major dry bulk commodities annually. So thank you again for having me, and looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you. Captain Soares, we'll go to you.
Okay, good morning to everybody. Bom dia, as we said in Brazil here. First, I'd like to wish that all participants in this brilliant conference are in very health, as well as their families and friends. I'd like to salute the colleagues in this panel. And I cannot avoid this. I think it's my obligation to pay our tribute to the victims and relatives of this terrible tragedy that COVID-19 brings to the whole world. Also, I'd like to thank to the seafarers in the world who are being true warriors in this pandemic and suffer from the lack of unfair permission to be changing. Ship is essential for the world, and the seafarers, they are essential also. So the company that I represent, I am a ship's captain. I stay on board for about 20 years as captains of dynamic position shuttle tankers. And then part of my career, I was transferred to the fleet administration. We have 60 ships all over the world, especially in Brazil and other parts of the world, tanker ships, crude, DP, and other parts. And I am at the present moment the executive operations manager to these ships. And as ship's captain, I faced some storms in my career. And I know that every storm has an end, but this storm is very different. This storm is especially different because it's a storm which represents the end of an era. We are in an end of a totally era of the human society. So we need to be very prepared to this. And sometimes in the night, I think about very much in the condition of the seafarers on board my ships and in the condition of the human society also. Thanks for having me, and I'd like to also to have a very much thank you to dear Carlin to invite me to participate of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Angus, we go to you. I know you don't need any introduction, but I'll allow you to say a few words.
Well, thank you very much, Sherice. I think our concerns within Schulte Group, we have approximately 18,000 seafarers ashore and afloat. What keeps us awake at night at the moment, our operational colleagues and our crew management colleagues, trying to support those seafarers, trying to support their families, reassure them, ensure that communication is as good as it possibly can be, and of course do everything we can to get overdue reliefs carried out and get people back to their families. And very importantly, we mustn't forget the seafarers ashore who are unable to go back to earning their living because they're unable to travel. So I think it's a major global problem, and as people have said already, things are improving. Hopefully, they will continue to improve. And I think the big lesson we have to learn here is that shipping has to punch its weight. Shipping has to come together and be represented effectively, so that key worker status isn't something that has to be fought for. It's something that's given willingly by those that enjoy the services that shipping provides.
Thank you. Now, each of you has really touched upon the topic of seafarers, and although I would have raised it later on in the conversation, I think this is really an opportune point to really jump in here. With many seafarers stranded, the unresolved crew change crisis is at the forefront of all of our minds. It's clear here from your statements, your opening statements. In some cases, although we have some countries saying that they're open for crew changes to take place, when you really do drill down, sometimes it's really only for their nationals. And we're finding that ships have to go significantly out of their way to actually perform crew changes. Peter Southgate, we're hearing all kinds of stories about, seafarers signing up for 14 months. I'm surprised to hear that because of MLC. What's the position from a regulatory perspective in relation to seafarers? And then we'll come on to what some of these companies are doing and how your companies are actually trying to deal with the seafarer crisis.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Sherice. Yeah, well, first and foremost, the Maritime Labour Convention, as you know, only permits maximum period of service of 12 months, and certainly contracts that are entered into beyond that period in breach of the convention requirements. We obviously, each situation has kind of to some extent crept up on people, and we are finding seafarers with that have done significantly more than the 12 months, to up to 14, maybe 15 months in some cases. And the general view is that that's not acceptable, and efforts need to be made to try and get these crew off as soon as possible. Now, to that end, a lot of port state control, a lot of administrations have set a mandate, and so that they will not entertain seafarers working for that length of time. And in some cases, they are actually threatening to detain ships if they arrive in their port with seafarers that have been on board for that length of time. So, there are measures in place to try and prevent this happening. Obviously, we're doing what we can. One of the difficulties we face as an administration is we cannot interfere in the immigration policy of a sovereign state. However, where a crew change is necessary, we will appeal to the authorities and say, look, this chap has been on for 13 months. We would encourage you to let them do the crew change here, and with a degree of success, not always, but with some degree of success. So the general viewpoint is that contracts beyond 12 months are not acceptable. We do accept that there are certain situations where crew members have found themselves in that position just because they haven't been able to get off. But we would strongly urge both the ship owner, ship operator, and the ports, the receiving ports, to facilitate crew changes as much as possible. Thank you.
Angela, there must be practical issues with that though, right? It's one thing for me to say, MLC doesn't allow a contract beyond 12 months, but if I physically cannot get the crew change executed, there must be practical issues with that. What are you guys seeing, and how is your company dealing with that?
Thank you. It is certainly an issue. So Foremost has always spent an enormous amount of time on crewing. My father was a seafaring captain himself, and so we understand the importance of crew members on board and how they are our front lines. Our crew are essential workers and should be treated as such. While we understand that, of course we want to repatriate them as quickly as possible, But as you mentioned, there are practicalities when nation states won't allow nationals of other countries to disembark in their country. And so what we're doing, we're taking a very multi-pronged approach. Number one, we are increasing wages for seafarers on board. We are also increasing wages for the standby crew members. One of the things that we found is that while there's stress for the crew members that are on board our ships, because they are not sure, and it's not necessarily because they're over contract yet, but because they're still uncertain as to when they can get home and the safety of their families at home. But there is also stress to the crew members that are not on board the ships, because they have families to support and they do not have incomes coming in, and they don't know when they can get on board the ships. So it's not just the members on board. We have to remember the crew seafaring community, and that there are many people that are stressed about and want to go on board to, again, earn the income that supports their families. And so that's why we have both increased the salaries on board as well as those on shore. Another very important factor that is not being fully recognized is that there are a lot of seafarers that need to be on board the ships so that they can accrue the sea time they need to get promoted. So this is also stagnating their income and promotion levels going forward by at least 1 to 2 years. And that's a big deal for a lot of these seafarers. We have always spent an enormous amount of time matching the right captain and the right chief engineer. There are certain, a lot of times human chemistry is an enormous issue as well. You can have 5 captains that are very equally qualified, but with 5 very different personalities, and they will get along with certain chief engineers and vice versa. And so all capable and technically competent, but just do better with certain combinations. And this has also raised uncertainty as to whether we can embark and disembark these crew members in the staggered fashion that create the right combinations. So that has created more stress on our crewing department as well. So these are all aspects that are beyond just the simple, when can you repatriate? Because there are second and third order effects as to the practicalities of when you can or cannot repatriate and what are you going to do about it. Thankfully, we've been rather fortunate because we use overwhelmingly Chinese crew, and so they have been able to disembark in China, but we also have some Burmese crew that have had great difficulties getting home. And so we've had to take extraordinary measures, keeping them in hotels for 2 weeks in quarantine, etc. But then the question is, do they have the flights to get home? Some of the flights don't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. So these are all the practicalities that we are dealing with on an everyday basis. But I think it's really important that we remember that our crew are essential workers and should be treated as such.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next topic, because we have quite a list to get through today, Jan-Willem, did you want to jump in there, offer your 2 cents in relation to this conversation, and then we'll move on to the next topic?
Okay. Yeah, I'll keep it brief. Normally, crewing is not something that we get involved with. We are charterers of ships, of all 700. So this is typically an owner's issue. But when crews start to become so anxious and so fed up that they refuse to provide stow plans or cooperate, it becomes our problem as well.
Yeah.
And there is always a human problem here at stake as well. And we're very, very conscious that this is an effort that needs everybody's efforts, because even if the owner tries their best, it might be a national or a visa issue that cannot be arranged, flights need to be arranged, etc. So we try to work together. And I think the power of our company is that we see a lot of different crewing agencies managed somehow, and we can share that information with other crewing agencies. I've also used my contacts with the Dutch National Airline in order to see what they're doing and help them define where else they should fly to. Because believe it or not, in this COVID time, they can actually designate certain flights as humanitarian flights and get new routes going. So they already started with 4 flights to the Philippines, and I heavily routed for setting up more flights to China, for example. So we can definitely have an impact, even though the seafarers are not on our payroll directly.
Thank you. You'll all agree that shipping, and we're talking a little bit about the number of issues that keep ship owners up at night. Regulation is another one. Now, you'd all agree that shipping is a highly regulated industry already. You know, shipping is accustomed to regulation, with more regulation coming down the pipeline. The industry tries very hard to be compliant, but there's a sense that I have from looking on that regulation can sometimes be very uncertain. You know, regulations have to be realistic and achievable and be done in partnership with the industry. There seems to be a gap between what the regulators are implementing and the reality of the industry. I don't know if you have that sense as well, but that's certainly my sense looking on. How do we increase our presence in the consultative process to ensure that, you know, the factors that affect us practically are taken into consideration? Angus, I'm going to go to you with this one. You know, what's your advice for the industry?
Well, I think it's a key question, and it's one that has come up at the beginning of today's sessions. I think most of us will remember when Frank suggested that we reinvent IMO. And, you know, that may well be a good starting point, because you have to have ship owners well represented at the governing body for shipping. So the sort of open question I would float here is the current structure of IMO, where you have national delegations, does that represent civil servants, or does that represent, you know, frontline shipping industry views? You know, I don't know what everybody else would think about that.
Jan-Willem?
Well, the IMO has a role to play, and they can get things done. Look a year ago. A year ago, the only thing we were talking about was basically how 2020 was going to impact us. And now it seems almost like a forgotten thing.
Yeah.
So I hold a view that shipping is already quite highly regulated. It can deal with new regulations as long as they're clear and enforceable. But I would also say we need to be more proactive as an industry to make sure that the decisions and the regulation that come our way are also the right place, because you can still argue whether the IMO 2020 0.5 sulfur max was a bit of an arbitrary decision. You know, there could have been different solutions. So I'm quite encouraged to see some of the enthusiasm going around to take the IMO's targets for 2030 and 2050, that people are really discussing those today already in this forum, yesterday already, and other fora too. I think the industry is taking this serious. They're looking forward. They're not sitting here waiting till 2030 to come up with solutions. And there are fantastic platforms to get started as an industry. And I think Mr. Lansky said that yesterday, as a regulator, if the industry regulates itself properly, his job becomes quite easy. And I think that's what we need to get to. We need to have a say in our own future. And the Global Maritime Forum is just one of those places where ship owners and charterers can come together and define how that should be done.
Thank you. Captain Soares, do you agree with him?
Yes, I totally agree with these observations, and I'd like to add also that despite the fact that many regulations we had before COVID-19, I think COVID-19 showed us that we need to go ahead with the changes. We need to go ahead with this because society expects from our service, from our maritime transport service, that we we going and show to the society that we are a business, a service to be very much aligned with the aspirations of the society. So there is no turning back. We need to go ahead. We need to change, and we need to change now. We need to change to go ahead with this. And of course, we need to harmonize the frequency of the change, but we need to talk. I think sometimes we don't talk too much. We have some separate parts of the shipping talking about, but they are not together, talking together to this. I think regulation and shipowners and all of the stuff. They need to discuss this, and we need to go ahead and going to shift, to change these levels of strategies of IMO in a very true scenario. So I believe we need to go ahead, we need to change this, and we need to transform the shipping activity in order to have and to reach the aspirations of the society.
Jan-Willem, you mentioned Jeff Lance. He said on one of his panels that his goal as a regulator is to be sure that they don't have regulation that is standing in the way of employing technology. What do you think will be more significant to the industry going forward? Green or digital? And is there really room for a choice? Angela?
Thank you. So let me just also comment on Angus and Jan-Willem's comments, because I think they have some really wonderful points that need emphasis. I think there should be a rethinking of the IMO. It has its place, but there needs to be rethinking. It is quite stunning that the ship owners don't have a seat at that organization the way they should, and yet we are being regulated by it. And so that is why oftentimes regulations come out that aren't completely practical, they're theoretical, they're well-intentioned, but they are not well thought out, and the second and third order effects are not what they had intended. But I also agree with what Jan-Willem said about shipping being a highly regulated industry. Our industry has gotten through so much regulation in the last 20 years. We are a very different industry than we were 20, 30, even 15 years ago. And so we have made great strides. And there is a misperception amongst the general populace that shipping is not regulated or is not regulated enough. And so we as an industry need to do a better job of communicating that we are a highly regulated industry and that we safely and almost invisibly transport over 90% of the world's trade while only causing 2% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. 90% of world trade is 11.9 billion tons of goods. That is 1.6 billion tons of goods per person per year. That is extraordinary. If people understood that their whole entire standard of living was being buttressed and supported by shipping, they would think twice. And so I think shipping is often caught in the crosshairs of regulation because we don't have a unified voice, we don't have strong lobbyists, we don't have a unified organization. And so, we need to create regulation that's thoughtful and realistic, not knee-jerk reactions. And the world needs to regulate what should be regulated, not just what can be regulated. And oftentimes it's too easy to regulate shipping without the effects that they want. Now, with regards to your question about digitalization, no question, we're on a trajectory both ways to more regulation and increased digitalization. And I think that's a wonderful thing for our industry. I think that the potentials of big data for how we increase safety on board, how we navigate, I think in terms of insurance claims, in terms of our industry's so-called accidents, they're still 90% human error. So if we can understand better what are the root causes, and a lot of these are, for instance, are the crew speaking to their families enough? Are they getting the support that they need? Are both on board, but also from ashore and from support from their families. So I think data is going to be really important in not just what we all think about in terms of whether we're going to go completely unmanned or whether the main engine can be fixed remotely, but there is going to be also a human psychological component that we can do a lot more research and analysis about keeping healthy work environments on board.
Captain Soares, this is a topic that's quite dear to you, I think. When we speak about digitalization, though, what exactly is that? What is a digital ship, and what will that look like? I think we lost your audio.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to open the audio here. But anyway, I think at this present moment, based on what IMO says about these maritime autonomous surface ships, we call it MAS, we can have a digital ship in 4 phases. We can have a digital ship that we have today. Part of the ship, they are automated, until they have the level 4, the automated ship, without anybody on board, without no persons on board, no seafarer. I don't think the ship will be reachable, but some types of ships, for example, tankers or passenger ships. I don't think maybe this will be to another kind of ships. And I don't think that we don't have any humans on board in a digital ship in the future, because at least at this present moment, with the propulsion based on fuel, if you have a problem in the main engine in the middle of the ocean, you still need to have a human activity, human adapters to change, to repair the main engine. So in my opinion, the digitalization will go into with the 2 trends, basically 2 trends. One is the remote centers. The remote centers to monitor the ships remotely that we already have here operated. In my company, we have a remote center that follow all those ships in terms of safety of navigation, bunker consumption, etc. I think this is a trend that we're going to develop more and more with this digital ship. And the other part of this is have with the technology, of course, and based on what is, I call it the key points to digitalization, which is data, extract data. Today, many of the systems on board, we don't manage data. We don't manage data in order to obtain and to analyze this data and transform this data in a very important issue to our process. Could be in the next coming year, but let's see. So the monitor center and the utilization of data will be very important to digitalization of the ships.
Angela, in preparing for today's panel, one of the comments you made to me was that the ship of the future and the fuel of the future doesn't actually exist yet. What does that look like from your perspective?
Well, I hope it hasn't been invented yet, because we're still looking for it. We're still looking, our industry is looking to 2030 and 2050. And even the ship designs that exist now are having trouble with getting to 2030. So we do need to innovate. I hope that we come up with a wonderful biofuel. I mean, that would be great. But these things take time, they take research. And I think that also as these regulations get rolled out in shipping, they have to be practical, and they have to also differentiate between the different segments of shipping. It is silly that shipping is lumped together as a monolithic industry, when in fact we have many segments that have very different forces and characteristics driving them. And so the regulations should be rolled out in a more segmented, differentiated way that will be practical and actually possible to comply with.
Jan-Willem, is LNG a fuel option that really gets us there, or is that just going to be interim?
Excuse me, what fuel?
LNG.
LNG, I think, has a place. We know some big container companies have it installed because they do a particular run from point A to point B and back again. I don't want to go on the record of knowing exactly what it is, but I think somewhere between 25 to 30% can be saved in greenhouse gases using LNG. So it probably has a role to play. But if we really truly want to get to the targets of 50% reduction against today's baseline, we need something more drastic. And we would not prefer to see that the energy goes towards an interim solution that's going to absorb the funds and the focus and energy from this industry when we actually need a more drastic solution. So to your question about digital and green, it's not an or question. It goes very much hand in hand. And because saving fuel is profitable. It's good. It's a good thing to try. So using technology to get either technology, hardware or software, either or, and we do both, that reduces the energy used to transport a ton mile is a good thing. Now, that can also, so LNG is one way, using efficiency devices or software to optimize the vessel's performance are ways, but we're not going to get there. We need alternative fuels. So we are super happy to support the Maersk McKinney Møller Center. $60 million the family has, or the foundation has put up to provide fundamental research in new fuels, because we will need those. And we're very happy to support that fully together with a couple of other big players.
Question for the panel, just a general poll question. By when will you see, or do you think we will see the first fully carbon neutral, commercially viable big ship? Less than 5 years? 5 to 10 years? Before 2050? Never? What do you think, Angus?
I think it's a massive question, and I'd like to just sort of go back a little bit to the previous question about you mentioned LNG is a transitional fuel. But I think Angela, you made a very good point that you can't just lump shipping into one huge block and think that there's one solution will work for everything. Within Schulte Group, we're looking very carefully at decarbonisation. It's one of my primary roles at the moment, and we believe that there are a number of paths you have to look at that are quite different. One is the existing fleet. How do you make the existing fleet more competitive? How do you reduce emissions? And the second is, how do you look further to the future, and how do you future-proof a new asset? And we've come to the conclusion that we look at two different types of fuel, and we've named them transitional fuels and destination fuels. A transitional fuel is something like a biofuel or LNG, something that allows you to make an impact now and puts off the terrible choice that some people are making that, well, we'll just wait until the perfect solution arrives. And I think that's a mistake. I mean, I think we're looking between now and 2050, you have to start doing something. You can't wait until the job's finished. So the transitional fuels are good, and they have a part to play. Biofuels are always going to be challenged for two reasons. One, they're quite expensive, and they're expensive because we are not the sole market for those fuels. You're going to be in competition with aircraft and road transportation, and the market will pull that fuel to wherever it's going to get the best price. Now, LNG, it's available now. The infrastructure is available. The technology is mature. So that's probably a way that people can safely go that will take the transition a long way towards 2050. And it may be that ships that start out as dual fuel LNG burners can be converted. But the ultimate destination fuels, in our opinion, will be those that do not emit carbon when they're burned. And that takes you into the green hydrogen economy and using green hydrogen as the building block for either an e-fuel, which could be something that could be burned in an internal combustion engine, but ultimately it will be something like a hydrogen carrier, such as green ammonia, which can be used and can be developed to produce a true zero emission ship.
So do you think that we'll have that before 2050?
I think it's going to be a gradual transition. I mean, I think by 2050, one thing we have been hearing about again and again in panels through the last couple of days is that the pace of change is increasing. And I would be very surprised if we didn't start to see moves towards destination fuels becoming widely available. And as I mentioned yesterday in the summing up, the shipping industry can't be left to do this on their own. It has to be a sector coupling approach where you have a number of industries that are using, for example, green hydrogen as the building block for various fuels, and the cost of the infrastructure necessary to roll those out for use at sea, on land, and in the air is shared by a number of industries. And in that way, I think the progress could be quicker than than some people might expect.
Does that then make the ships that we have today obsolete in the next 10 years then?
Well, my opinion on that is that, again, it will be gradual. I think, as I said in the beginning of this this answer, that we have to treat the existing fleet in a different way to a clean sheet of paper that you have for new ships. So you have to find incremental ways of making the existing fleet more efficient. And I wouldn't like to put, a sell-by date on any ship. I mean, owners have options. There are things you can do. There are less carbon-intensive fuels that you can burn, and they may be drop-in fuels like biofuels that can be successfully used on existing ships. But at the moment, nobody is using 100% biofuels, and again, you have this scarcity issue. So the supply chain, I think, would have to gear up massively to make that a universal solution for existing ships.
Jan-Willem, who do you think will control freight in the next 5 to 10 years? Do you think that we'll start to see a change coming through from that aspect of the industry? We're not hearing you.
Try again. It stands to reason that there will be changes. Commercially speaking, 15 years ago, it was such a bull run in freight that the owners were very much in the driver's seat. Then a lot of shipbuilding happened and the charters were in the driving seat. But I think going forward, we might get competition from a totally different angle. Big data, people looking at traditional businesses and saying, how is that business being conducted? And can that be done totally different? And I would just urge all of you to think how you used to book travel, a trip to anywhere about 20 years ago, how you used to do that, calling a travel agent versus how you do that today. And I'm not going to say that that's exactly how shipping is going to go, but I think there will be changes and people will be looking at our business in a totally different light. The business of shipping, right? People will still have to run boats, crews will still have to do repairs, but I think the business of shipping might definitely change depending on the outcome. So we change from within, or will we change from the outside, or a bit of both?
That's a great segue into our very last point, and that's about the number of startups in the industry. We were chatting about this again in preparing for today's session, and we were talking about whether if I was a startup, would I see the US as the place of opportunity for me, or will I have better opportunity elsewhere? Latin America, Africa, Asia, Europe. Angela, what do you think about that? You're based in New York.
I think that's a little bit of a two-part question, because on the one hand, there's no question that the entrepreneurship in the United States is really second to none. We are Silicon is an enormous disruptor to so many industries that we would never have imagined 5 years ago. I mean, the iPhone's only been with us 11 years, and think about how it's transformed our lives. But the other flip side of it is also, where's the talent? I think the United States also has some of the best maritime universities. It has the infrastructure, the finance infrastructure, the insurance infrastructure. There are only a few places in the world that can compete with the US on that. But I think the combination with Silicon Valley and that innovation and entrepreneurship really does give the US an enormous edge. But I speak as an American, a proud American of immigrant parents to this country. So I'm very grateful to what this country has given to us and our family. So I'd love to also hear some of the more international views.
Yeah. What about you, Jan-Willem? You need to unmute yourself. We're not hearing you.
Sorry. I would flip the question around and I say, why not? I mean, you can run a very successful shipping business from the United States for sure. But what needs to happen is we need to promote shipping a lot more. We need to promote the benefits and make this business much more attractive to a much broader talent pipeline. We have maritime school, but I think we need much higher participation of women in this industry. And I think with some of the digital and sustainability issues that are now being talked about a lot, I think there's a huge opportunity to attract different and talent to this industry. And honestly, it deserves it for the reasons that Angela Chao mentioned earlier. It's of a very important economic reasons that we need to dedicate some of the best talent to shipping, period. But it's up to us, I think, to make our business more attractive in the spotlight.
Captain Soares?
Oh, yes. Shipowners are naturally cautious when it comes to new technology. But we need to change our culture. We need to change our culture. We need to use this also to attract more the young generation to this shipping business. So I think startups, yesterday I have a manager he talking about a hackathon. Hackathon is another new term. This is this kind of meeting of setups of startups. They call it hackathon. So we need to go ahead with this. We need to know how to operate this. We need to incorporate this to our business. So, and to America also, I think America is pioneer. United States is pioneer in many aspects. And I think in these aspects, then can be very good attracted to have these startups in America and in all over the shipping industry in the world.
Angus, do you agree? Because, from where I sit, there are some countries where shipping is a way of life. It's part of their culture. When I think of countries like Greece, it's a part of them, everyone, whether they're in the industry or not. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I think it is, that is very true. Certain countries have a maritime tradition, but I think overall shipping needs to raise its profile. We need to be seen as a forward-looking industry. We need to be seen as something that has a foot in the future instead of having 2 feet stuck in the past.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I mean, we're very much out of time, unfortunately, but I would like to give each of you the opportunity to make a closing remark, if you'd like to. And I'll start with you, Captain Soares.
Okay. As I said in the beginning, I think we live in a very different situation in the human society history. There is a concept created in U.S. Army, which called the VUCA world, VUCA of volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguity world. That's exactly the world that we live. I think we live not in an era of change, but a changing era. So we need to go ahead, and this VUCA world is only the beginning. It is the birth of this new world, which the traditional concepts, the traditional things that we did today not very much accepted. So I think we go ahead based on these two trends that there is no point of inflection. We need to go ahead with decarbonization and digitalization of shipping in order to all the time bring to our clients, bring to the society the best maritime transport that they aspire.
Thank you. Jan-Willem, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think I'll come back to the partnerships. So let's make it practical. If you want to increase safety, or you want to know how your boats are doing on greenhouse gases, take a look at RightShip. They provide measures for both. If you want to get involved with the ship of the future, go to the Go to Zero Coalition from the Global Maritime Forum. They're working on that. You want to be involved with marine environment protection. Well, Carleen can tell you everything about NAMEPA, and if not her, I'll do it. I'll do the talking about that. the Sea Cargo Charter was signed earlier this week, or was it last week or this week? Signed up to set up standards how we're going to measure the output uniformly as an industry, as charters. So there are plenty of opportunities to get involved, and that's my call out, I think, to everybody on the call. If you're interested in any of those areas or all of them, there's plenty of opportunity to get involved, and you don't have to do it all alone.
Thank you. Angela.
Thank you very much for putting this together today. I think we could have talked for hours. There are so many issues facing our industry. And so thank you for giving us this opportunity. I hope we will continue to have more, because we need to be a unified voice. The general populace needs to understand what we do and how well we do it, actually, because they have been completely undisturbed and unbothered by our movement of world trade around the world, and also in subsidizing the standard of living. And so I look forward to working with everybody on this together. So thank you.
Angus, I'll give you an opportunity to make a final statement. And we do have 2 questions from the public that I would like to share with the group to see what your thoughts are. Angus?
Well, thank you, Sherice. I mean, my sort of closing comment would be, we're really focused on sustainability. And if we're looking at the energy transition, I think it's very important to remember that this does not just impact shipping. This impacts every industry, every energy consumer. So I think, we should start looking a little bit to the right and the left, and just make sure we track what other people are doing as well.
Thank you. Well, so here's the first question coming in from our audience. The general public is largely ignorant about the shipping industry. How can we change that? How can we make the shipping industry more public? How can we make ourselves more public to the industry generally, or to people generally? Any suggestions from the panel?
Can I just come in? I mean, I think that certainly the work of the IMO, and I know we've discussed the IMO during the session, but I think we have seen significant advances in for example, decarbonization initiatives. That's very public, very forward-looking, and I think it's sending a message that the IMO to the general populace, that the IMO looks at shipping and looks at the impact of shipping, the positive impact, but also is addressing the potential negative impact. But there's been a whole step change in the way that IMO approaches regulation. I wouldn't want to leave this session without going on that. But at the end of the day, I don't think we have a standardized PR machine like other sectors, and I think that's something we could do. We have room for improvement. Thank you.
I guess the very first thing we'd want that PR machine to do is to get in front of the public, the very real humanitarian crisis that we have in relation to our crew. I think, people just don't understand it. We hear a little bit about it because we're in the industry, but, my view, and I think that's the view of some of the audience, is that the general public is just very much unaware of the crisis. What do you think that we can do to bring this more to the forefront of the general public's mind?
Well, if you ask me, it's very easy in this world of social media. If something goes wrong, the spotlight is on you very quickly, right? Heaven forbid you have an oil spill or something like that, or trash overboard and somebody notices it. You shouldn't be doing that in the first place. But I think there's a huge opportunity to embrace the sustainability and make that a pillar that might appeal to a much wider audience. If we're seen to make real efforts and real strides using technology to make advances in the sustainability part in what we're doing, that might attract a totally different audience than if you're going to make the point about commodities moving around. Intuitively, I don't think that appeals to a wide audience, even though it should. So my bet would be on the sustainability.
Angela, any final comment?
This is a question that I've been asking for some time now, and I've been actually asking lots of people for their advice. So I think that's a great question, and we're still looking for that answer. But I think we're moving towards it with a lot of unification of rules and regulations across sectors, and that will help bring us together as well. And forums like this, I think, are important, that we exchange our ideas and we learn from one another. I have been suggested on several occasions, people are like, well, then why doesn't shipping just get a PR firm? And I don't think that's necessarily the right thing to do, actually. I always think that, we're so good at doing what we do, and we don't want to take our eye off that necessarily. But we do need some kind of unified organization where we all have a seat at the table and a voice at the table. Our industry is represented by faces and voices, not by ticker symbols. And that, we come together to forward the values that our industry is upholding. And we all agree in sustainability. We all want to be on the right side of history in terms of the environment. And I think our industry has made great strides in the last 20 years in that. And we need to continue to do that and think hard about how we get our message out to the public. And I'm open all ears to any suggestions.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I think, panel, we've managed to come to the end of our session. I'd like to really thank all of you for participating today, for sharing your ideas, for sharing your perspectives on the industry and what your companies are doing. Thank you again to the Cayman Islands Registry for hosting this session, and to SHIPPINGInsight for the conference generally. Thank you, and I hand it over to Colleen.